In the 1950s, young John was not only admitted to Princeton University, but also received the prestigious Carnegie Scholarship, one of only 2 awarded. To his classmates, however, he was an oddity. From his first day on campus, he never attended a single class, often scribbling on his dorm room windows, and was known to study the flight patterns of pigeons around the campus, which led his peers to consider him somewhat of a madman. As the majority of his classmates began publishing papers, John, with no progress in his original theory, felt compelled to approach his mentor, pleading for an opportunity to meet with Einstein to seek guidance. However, due to his lack of research results, his mentor flatly refused. Confused and seeking answers, John was pointed towards the lounge by his mentor. There, a professor sat at a round table, surrounded by scholars, presenting him with their pens, a unique ritual of the academy symbolizing recognition of a professor's lifetime achievements. John watched enviously, only to be reminded by his mentor of the hard work required to achieve such recognition.
I'm sorry, but up to this point, your record doesn't warrant any placement at all.
Disheartened, John returned to his dorm room, continuing his efforts without success. In a moment of frustration, he headbutted the glass window, causing a loud noise that drew the attention of his roommate Charles. Without saying much, Charles pushed John's desk to the window and hurled it out. As the desk shattered upon impact, scattering John's research papers everywhere, John couldn't help but laugh. That evening, Charles took him to a bar where their attention was soon captured by a group of tall women, particularly a blonde who drew the gaze of every man present. Remembering a previous embarrassing encounter with a woman at the bar, John's classmates urged him to approach her again. This time, however, he resisted their persuasion and instead had a moment of epiphany, deriving a series of scenarios from the probability of pursuing women, which led him to a breakthrough in his long-stumped theory. Rushing back to his dorm, John devoted himself to his research. As winter melted into spring, he revolutionized economic theory, which had stood unchallenged for over 150 years with a mere 27-page paper. His significant contribution allowed him the freedom to choose his path forward. John chose the Wheeler Laboratory, his dream institution. At the celebration, everyone offered him heartfelt congratulations. 5 years later, John had become a leading figure at the Wheeler Laboratory. During a special assignment at the Pentagon, he was tasked with decoding encrypted Soviet telegrams, a puzzle that had baffled the military. Without using paper or pen, John deciphered the code with his eyes alone, translating the numbers into coordinates that potentially mapped Soviet routes into the United States. While John was coordinating with a general, he suddenly noticed a man in black watching him from an attic. He asked the general who it was, but his question was ignored, and he was dismissed under the pretext of discussing classified matters. John felt undervalued, possessing great skills with no outlet for their use. John was teaching at Princeton University. One day, during a particularly noisy renovation below his classroom, he closed the windows against his students' wishes, making the room unbearably hot. A beautiful student stood up, negotiated with the workers to limit their noise to non-class hours, solving both the noise and heat issues. The mysterious man in black approached John again that evening, introducing himself as William, an agent from the Department of Defense, inviting John to a secret mission. He led John to an abandoned warehouse, revealing a hidden military base. William explained that the Soviets had developed an atomic bomb and planned to detonate it in the United States. Soviet spies within the country were communicating through coded messages in newspapers and magazines. They needed John's genius to decrypt these messages. To facilitate his new role, William implanted an electronic key in John's arm, allowing him access to drop-off locations for decoded messages. Thus, John became a secret agent for the Department of Defense, deciphering codes from newspapers and magazines in his spare time, while also enjoying the blossoming of love in his life. The woman who had resolved the window issue, Alicia, expressed her immediate attraction to John and invited him to a dinner party. It was John's first invitation from a woman, and despite being out of his element, he dressed up and attended the event with Alicia. During a photo op with the governor, Alicia attentively adjusted John's tie and placed her handkerchief in his suit pocket, capturing his heart completely from that moment on. After the dinner, they found themselves under a starlit sky. John was amazed to learn that Alicia also tried to guard the stars, realizing they were both misfits, which deepened their connection. During a date, despite John's poor social skills, Alicia understood his feelings and responded with a kiss. When Charles, John's roommate, and his niece unexpectedly visited, John excitedly shared his encounter with Alicia, encouraged by Charles to pursue her boldly. On Alicia's birthday, John gifted her a beautiful crystal globe, and despite a nervous and rambling proposal, the intelligent Alicia understood his intentions. They were married, becoming soulmates through thick and thin. Yet John did not forget his mission, collecting newspapers and magazines daily, decoding messages, sealing them with wax, and discreetly delivering them to a designated drop-off location, using the electronic key in his arm to access the site. One night, as John was delivering an envelope, William suddenly raced up in his car, urging John to get in quickly, revealing that the drop-off point had been compromised by Soviet spies. Just as John got into the car, a black vehicle appeared behind them, leading to a frantic chase that ended in a narrow escape. John returned home late at night, still shaken. Despite his wife's questions, he remained silent and locked himself in his room. The next day, John confronted William, expressing his desire to quit due to the danger, especially now that his wife was pregnant, but William refused to release him from his duties. John's behavior became increasingly erratic. In class, he would leave abruptly at the sight of any unusual vehicles, and at night he insisted on keeping the lights off to avoid attracting Soviet spies. Alicia was at a loss for what had changed in John. His hysterical state caused her immense pain. Unable to bear it any longer, she made a call. During a mathematics conference, John, while speaking, panicked at the sight of men in black suits entering the room, mistaking them for Soviet spies. He fled only to be surrounded and confronted by Dr. Rosen, who introduced himself as a psychiatrist, asking for John's cooperation. John, refusing to believe Dr. Rosen, lashed out but was quickly subdued and sedated. When he awoke, he found himself restrained, his attempts to move hindered by chains. John saw Charles in the corner and pleaded for his help, but Dr. Rosen, following John's gaze, saw no one there. John was then dragged away by two doctors. Dr. Rosen informed Alicia that John likely had schizophrenia, a condition that had been developing since his college years, evidenced by the fact that John had no actual roommate during that time. Alicia, shocked by the revelation, visited John's office with his assistant, finding the room plastered with magazines and newspapers. Following the clues to the drop-off point, an abandoned villa, she discovered a mailbox filled with unopened envelopes. Upon their next meeting, John was still lost in his delusions, fearing an imminent attack by Soviet spies. Alicia, unable to bear it any longer, presented the intact envelopes, debunking the existence of William and any secret missions, revealing it all to be John's fantasy. John's world collapsed with the realization of his illness. A year had passed and their child was now several months old. Although John had returned home, he required ongoing medication, which impaired his cognitive functions to the point where he could not work or even care for his child effectively. To alleviate his condition, John started secretly refusing his medication, hiding the pills each time. Eventually, his symptoms returned, with strange codes reappearing on his papers and the long-absent William making a reappearance. Under William's coercion, John was led to an abandoned cabin transformed into a secret base. Desperate to prove himself, John resumed his decoding work. On a day that looked like rain, his wife decided to bring in the laundry. John offered to bathe their child, and his wife, seeing him seemingly well, agreed. However, while collecting laundry, she heard a radio from the abandoned cabin and discovered the room plastered with newspapers and magazines again. Realizing John's condition had worsened, she rushed back home. John left their infant in the bathtub and went to close a window. The baby's cries alerted Alicia, who arrived just in time to prevent a tragedy. Intending to call Dr. Rosen, Alicia was confronted by the reappearances of William, Charles, and the little girl, with William urging John to kill Alicia. After a moment of rapid thought, John identified a flaw in his hallucinations. The little girl hadn't aged over the years. This realization helped him understand that these figures weren't real. For the first time, John saw through his delusions. Dr. Rosen suggested increasing his medication and therapy, but John believed his schizophrenia was a complex mathematical problem he could solve. Dr. Rosen disagreed, warning that without treatment, John might live forever in his delusions. Fearing he might harm his wife during an episode, John asked her to stay with her parents for a while. After a moment of contemplation, Alicia decided to support John in his struggle against his condition.
I wasn't said to call if you try and kill me or anything.
John resolved to combat his schizophrenia using his intellect. 2 months later, he returned to Princeton, seeking his former rival, Martin, now a professor. Martin relaxed upon learning John sought a familiar environment to ease his condition. However, John's first day back was marked by an outburst, shouting at thin air, "You're not real." Martin comforted him, helping him calm down. Returning home, embarrassed by the day's events, John considered returning to the hospital but was encouraged by Alicia's support. The next day, faced with constant visions of Charles and the little girl, John chose to bid them farewell, deciding to ignore them henceforth. Over time, John's resilience built an unbreakable wall against his misfortunes. Years later, he became a benevolent elder, captivating students with his patient explanations and humor. Martin was astounded by John's recovery, knowing few were aware of his severe schizophrenia. When approached by a stranger after class, John confirmed his visibility with students before engaging, ensuring he wasn't a hallucination. Confirmed to receive the Nobel Prize in Mathematics, John, at the 1994 Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, reflected on his belief in mathematics and logic as the sole explainers of the world, acknowledging his journey had taught him otherwise.
It is only in the mysterious equations of love that any logical reasons can be found. I'm only here tonight because of you.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this.